Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading Exodus chapter 21. Now, these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the seventh he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be your master's, and he shall go out by himself. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation, he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if he have betrothed her unto a son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. And if he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. He that smiteth a man, so that he die, shall be surely put to death. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from mine altar, that he may die. And he that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. And he that stealeth a man, and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. And he that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. And if men strive together, and one smite another with a stone, or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, if he rise again, and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished, notwithstanding. If he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. And if a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. If an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. If there be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give for the ransom of his life whatsoever is laid upon him, whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to this judgment shall it be done unto him. If the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. And if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit, and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good, and give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. And if one man's ox hurt another's, that he die, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money of it, and the dead ox also they shall divide. Or if it be known that the ox hath used to push in time past, and his owner hath not kept him in, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead shall be his own. Summarizing Exodus chapter 21, God gives Moses additional instructions on the codes of conduct. In verse 2, God tells Moses, "If you purchase a Hebrew servant, he shall serve only 6 years and be free at the seventh without paying anything. If he was purchased with a wife, he shall leave with his wife. But if the master gave the slave a wife, or he was married during his, servitude, then the wife and the children belong to the master. The slave can choose to go free, or he can choose to remain enslaved to keep his wife and children. In order to do this, the slave must declare he doesn't want to be free. The master will bring the slave before God, pierce the slave's ear, and the slave will serve the master forever." In verse 7, if a man sells a daughter as a slave, she will not go free or be sold to foreigners. Since the master chose her, he breaks the contract if he says that she displeases him. All the master can do with her at this point is resell her within the society that they're in, or have her marry his son. Then she will become the master's daughter. In verse 10, if the son that the woman is, the slave woman is betrothed to or, married to, if that son decides to marry another woman, the slave woman shall not be deprived of food, clothing, or marital rights. If the son or whichever man who's married to her does not provide those three things for her, food, clothing, marital rights, she shall go freely. Verse 12, whoever strikes a man with the intent to kill him and he dies, he shall be put to death. But if it's an accident, God will appoint a place of safety for the slayer. Verse 13, a man who deliberately murders should be put to death. Verse 15, if anyone kills their parents, they should be put to death. In verse 16, kidnappers should be put to death. Verse 17, anyone who curseth or who dishonors their parents should be put to death. Depending on the translations, some translations say Exodus 21 verse 17 is curseth, and some say dishonors. Verse 18, if a man injures another severely, the assailant must compensate the injured man for his loss of time until he's thoroughly healed. Verse 20, if a man kills his slave, the slave must be avenged. If the slave is beaten but recovers, the master will suffer no consequences. The slave is his property. Verse 22, if a pregnant woman delivers birth prematurely as a result of being hit, but the child is okay, then the person who hit her will be fined whatever price the woman's husband demands. So if the child survives and he's viable, there's nothing wrong, the person who hit the pregnant woman just has to pay a fine of whatever the husband or the father of the child demands. But in verse 23, if there is further injury to the child later on, the punishment must match the injury. So this is where we get the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for a burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. That whole eye for an eye thing, that's referring to a woman having a child prematurely as a result of being hit, and the punishment must match the injury if the child is, develops some sort of, you know, issue from being born from that type of injury. Okay? So if a man harms a servant's eye or tooth and destroys it, the servant can go free. If an ox kills a human, it must be stoned to death. But if the owner is innocent, but only if the owner is innocent. So if an ox kills a human, but the owner is innocent, then only the ox is stoned to death. But if the owner knew the ox had a problem and was violent, and the owner was warned, but took no precautionary measures, and the animal killed someone, then the animal and the owner shall be put to death. Unless the family of the deceased. So if the ox animal gets out, kills a person, if the family of the deceased person demands money from the owner of the animal, then the owner can just pay the fine instead of being stoned to death. And that also applies to children. If a child is murdered from an ox getting out and the family of the child just demands money, then the fine can be paid and that will resolve the issue. Verse 32. If a slave is killed by an ox, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver, and then the ox must also be stoned to death. Verse 33. If a man dug a pit that kills an ox or donkey, the man should give the owner money. Verse 35. If a bull kills another bull, the live bull should be sold, and both owners should divide the money. If the killer bull has a history of violence, the owner is required to replace the dead bull with another. Highlights of Exodus chapter 21. Slavery. Slavery and codes of conduct regulating slavery is most of this chapter. So, from verse 1 through verse 11 are general codes of conduct for slavery. Verse 20, verse 21, verse 26, verse 27, and verse 32 all relate to slavery and how to morally, or codes of conduct for slavery. I'm just going to say that, codes of conduct for slavery. So, the first thing I want to say is slavery is a human creation. God did not create slavery, and God did not encourage slavery. How we feel does not affect reality. Slavery still exists today in American society as punishment for a crime in specific cases. So we're not even completely done with slavery in our own country. So that's number one. Number two, I just want to reemphasize that this is a human creation. The Israelites just got out of Egypt where they were slaves, and God is having to give them rules about how to deal with slaves. And some of these rules are, if you harm the eye or the tooth and destroy it, they may go free. So in order for God to have to give these type of commands of codes of conduct, this is something that people were doing even after being enslaved themselves. I'd also like to point out that capitalism in America, the principles of capitalism still are heavily influenced by slavery, chattel slavery in America. So this human condition that keeps repeating itself over and over again, God didn't just abolish it because it's showing up again and again. Again, God does not owe us living by a moral code that we think is appropriate, because we don't even live by our own appropriate moral codes. Appropriate. We don't even live by them, and we have a problem keeping those same codes. So the creator who made us and everything in this world, we don't get to tell God what's moral and what he should have done in this situation. But I just want to point out that this system that keeps showing up over and over again, and capitalism, seriously reflects a lot of the principles in slavery. A lot of them. A manager getting credit for all the hard work of the underlings. The fact that those are even terms that we use. I don't want to get too deep in it because I am African American, I live in the South, and I do have direct history from that time period. So I know I have to mention it because I am Christian, I'm not blind. I read it and I did feel uncomfortable. But again, I'm a product of creation. It is arrogant for me to think that I have any right to think of what God should have done different. This is God's earth. If this is how he chose to deal with it, that's how he chose to deal with it. I just want to understand what this word says. Slavery itself is present in every society in some form, has been, and the principles of slavery continues to present itself. This is why we have to have a minimum wage, because companies wouldn't pay you a minimum wage if there was not a law to instill it. So just don't let the word slavery and the history and the fact that God didn't just abolish it, don't let that make you feel some kind of way about God. I just want to point that out. This country has to have minimum wage because if they didn't, companies would pay you nothing if they could. Just saying. Verse 4 and 5. If a master provides a wife for his male servant, he can go freely or remain and serve the master forever. Verse 7 through 11. If female slaves don't go free, they either become betrothed, and betrothed means engaged for marriage. They become betrothed to either the master who purchased her or the master's son, and then she's dealt with as a daughter. It also says she must be provided for. The Bible also says she must be provided for and lists her food, her clothes, and her marital rights. She must receive those three things or she'll be able to go free. We have to think about a society that God regulates slavery and that slavery is permissible, how women are treated and the laws regarding women. Women require extra protection. And they had in this type of society, there had to be some sort of rules to ensure that women were there were as many resources available as possible for women to survive. We have to think about this in verse 4 through 5 when we're talking about a male master, and if he earns his freedom, but male master, a male slave, he earns his freedom. The master tells him, okay, you've earned your freedom, you can leave now, but I've provided you with your wife and children. If he earns his freedom, we have to think about it. In the society, the only skill set he has is being a slave. He probably doesn't have any money, and it would not make sense for him to seek out other types of employment or other type of opportunities with a wife and children when the master could just provide for them and have him stay there. And that is uncomfortable, and that is an uncomfortable thing to look at. But when we think about Joseph was the biblical character. He had the coat of many colors. He is the one his brothers sold into slavery, and he was able to finesse his way into becoming governor of Egypt. Well, Joseph was an anomaly. Number one, he had a special skill set. He could interpret dreams. And because he was able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, that's what earned him becoming a governor in Egypt. Also, he moved to a different location. He was sold into slavery when he was in the land of Canaan with his brothers and family. Once he came to Egypt, he started working for a powerful man, Potiphar. His wife, wanted to get into bed with him, accused him of sexual assault when he rejected her advances, and then after that, he was able to he went to jail, and he had to wait in jail for a couple of years, 2 years at least. And then he was able to earn, the really once in a lifetime opportunity of becoming governor. That was a that was not a usual or a normal story for a person who got sold into slavery. So this law was here to help women, to make sure women didn't just end up um, just to protect women. I'll just put it like that. It was here to protect women. So restrictions are there for protection, not always for limitation. And a way to think of that is a seatbelt. So that is that is what I got out of this. I am human, and I am not perfect, and I am not a scholar. I am just a product of creation, attempting to understand this word written in Old English. So, thank you for watching up until this point. The next upload will be Exodus chapter 22.